Okay, so the first thing on our list here in W3 Schools is learning what Python is. It has some text overview. It says, hey, what can Python do? Why Python? Good things to read here. With that being said, we're going to use this as a tutor, so we're going to say, what is Python? And what are 10 specific ways I could use it in a professional setting or job task situation. And we're going to see what it comes out with, because the goal is just to get Python get ChatGPT to give us the highest level of detail and complexity of information, and for it to expand upon whatever we want. So when you're prompting it like this, you might want to give it who you are, what field you're working in, so that way, if that is relevant to your learning process, or what you want to be learning. So like, for example, if you want to be learning game development, you should try to scope everything about what you're learning in Python down to the context of game development so that it can stick in your brain better. We see we have an awesome bunch of examples here that are coming out. They weren't not covered here, but they weren't covered in this level of detail. Okay, so we have an example, and then it says, hey, print hello world, right? So we can try it for ourselves here. And we do have this. That's great. And we could see how this works. But let's ask as a tutor, just literally, can you explain what this code does? And then it's going to say, okay, this code, its basic command, it's going to tell the computer to print the text to the console. And let's say I don't know anything about programming, so we can just ask it to explain to me what a console is. What is printing? So I don't understand what happens when text is printed, let's say. And it says, okay, a console, and then it gives a full breakdown of what that is. And then I can even say, explain that to me again, like I'm 10. And if this gets to be too lengthy, and I just want it to explain it to me again like I'm 10. All right, so it's explaining this to me like I'm 10. Perfect. And so it says the computer will write down the words hello world on the screen so you can see it. It's just like when your teacher, when you tell your teacher to write something on the board for the class to see. So perfect 10-year-old level explanation. And what I can do is I can say, explain all code to me in future examples as if I am 10. And then hopefully it'll say, okay, for sure, from now on, I'm going to explain this to you like you're 10. So we do have that context set, and we're good to go. So let's move on to the next thing in W3 Schools. Okay, so this is talking about Python install. And if we were doing this on a computer that needed to install Python to run, which in this case we're going to be using Google Colab, which already has Python installed on it, so we can actually take that code that we just had, and we can run it here just to show you Python's already installed, so we don't need to do that. But in a situation like this, I could ask ChatGPT, what's the difference between having Python installed on a computer versus running it in a notebook environment? So we could say, what's the difference between installing Python on my computer running it in a notebook on Google Colab. And so this can get kind of complicated from the beginning whenever you start just digesting what things are. So it's worth literally using it like a tutor and asking it the same questions that you would ask a human. So just go through and say, hey, if you could tell me what the difference is between running code on my local computer versus running it in Google Colab, why would I do anything different, right? So in this case, it'll break that down and show you. Talks a little about the command line, and we're ready to go. So we have some Python syntax as our next example. Okay, so I'm just going to ask it, say, give me some examples how Python syntax is used. All right, cool. So it's going to give us a breakdown of Python syntax. And syntax is simply outlined here. It's pretty much just how the characters fit together and the structure of how, commas and spaces and all these other things, equal signs, how all this different stuff on the keyboard goes into the computer, how that all works and how that should be laid out. So one thing that it's very particular about is these spaces. So you'll generally just hit enter and then hit tab, and then that space will be what defines a new line. And so that's a really valuable piece of Python that you're going to want to know. But you have a couple of different examples, right? So like you have a function, and we're not at functions yet, but what we could do, if you want to just learn something, even if it's an advanced topic, what's going on there, you could just go into Google Colab and let's just hit code, add another code block down here. We'll just run that and we'll just see. So if I say def greet name, print hello plus name. So I could say hello Micah, and then I can hit shift enter to run that. And I can start to understand how those variables work just from the sheer fact that I just copied and pasted the code over and I'm just sort of playing with it. Okay, so I outlined some of the possible errors of how if I don't indent, like I was just talking about, you could have this error you run into. Or if you indent too much, you see there's not enough indent here and there's too much here. So let me just ask ChatGPT. I'll say, can you give me some examples of bad syntax usage? And then it should give me some examples of things that I could do wrong so I can start to understand the pattern visually of what looks like bad Python and what looks like good Python. So you see if I don't have a colon here, that could be an issue. If I have a colon but I don't have an indentation, that's not going to work. And I can actually find out that this won't work because if I take this over into Google Colab and run it, you see it has an error because of indentation. Very useful. So at the end here, there's a practice exercise, but we could ask ChatGPT for 10 problems that it could give us that we could use to test our Python syntax. So we could ask it, give me 10 Python syntax problem questions that I could use to practice my skills. And we'll fire that off, and then it's going to generate those questions. So it's going to say, question 1, what will this print? Question 2, what's the error in this code? Question 3, what will the following code print? And then it's just going to push all the way through with actual code problems it's generating on the fly. So this is expanding on what W3 Schools has, is actually creating a learning curriculum for you on the fly based off of your inputs. You could say, hey, can you give me 5 specific problems on indentation, because that is my real focal point for learning, where I'm having a real issue. So I could even ask that, give me 5 specific problems focused on indentation, because that is my weak point of understanding. And we could, at any point in time, ask it as many questions as we want. So it's giving us 5 specific problems on indentation, but at any point in time, we could ask it in reference, hey, can you expand on what I'm supposed to find in problem number 2 that you gave me in that last prompt? You could ask it something like that. See, all of these problems are focused on indentation, so it's very based in the context of what you just asked it to do here. But all right, this is a lot for you to be able to work with, especially since we're just getting into basics and you may not even know what these functions or anything are. So don't get overwhelmed, because in the next couple of videos, we're going to breeze through every last bit of everything throughout this entire list here. So you're going to learn a lot. So just kind of buckle in and just stay available to just soak in and understand. All right, so next thing we're going to focus on is Python comments. So we're going to go see what W3 Schools has. So comments are just a very simple way to use a hashtag to put a little note in there for yourself. So you could put a comment in at the top or after a line, and you could use that to kind of leave some notes for yourself. So if you want to do multi-line comments, you just do a hashtag for every single line. Pretty straightforward. And then if you wanted to, you could do something like this. And as you'll see, this gets ignored by the code because it is within the comment string. So I'm going to say, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to give me all of these problem projects, these little guys right here for the syntax lesson that we just did. And I'm going to have it say, can you contextualize with comments what all of these lines of code are supposed to be doing? And so I'm just going to ask it here, can you provide comments for each line of code in the last set of problems you provided? And so it's going to go back through and it's going to rewrite all of this to contextualize everything. So you see how it says, okay, for this line, this is what that line does. And for this line, this is what that line does. And then so on and so forth. Now, for this type of stuff, comments are really going to be your friend, but this allows you to see them in action working, because without a context of where somebody might use a comment, you may have a hard time figuring out how to apply them. So I'm going to expand that here just a little bit just to show you, right? So see how it has those all neatly laid out for you. Show you here. We can copy this in here, and you see that's how that's put there. So they're just little notes, right? We can run this to see if this fails, right? But yep, so this whole thing runs, all these comments are there, and then these are actual commands, right? So that's why this comes out. It's not because of this. This is all hidden. This is just an internal note. So comments are a pretty easy situation, very easy to set up in Python. But this is one really neat way to use ChatGPT to just get it to constantly. You're gonna be wanting it to do this whenever it's tutoring you. You're gonna say, hey, I want you to add more robust comments to that, or could you add some additional context to the comments or something like that. You can always do that with comments. But yeah, I think that about covers that one. So let's go ahead and dive into variables. All right, as we're moving into variables, we can look this over, but let's lean more into ChatGPT for getting some of our kind of information that we're just using W3 as like a just sort of like a rough study guide. But then anything that we see that we don't understand, let's bring it over to ChatGPT. So like, for instance, I'm just going to ask ChatGPT to give me 10 examples. Let's say 10 complex examples of Python variable usage. And then what I'm hoping it'll do is provide and it already is doing it, like dictionaries and lists and other things like that into variables. So it's already showing you how something that we haven't even learned about, a list of dictionaries, right? That can be stored as a variable. Now a function, very cool, is actually taking a function and putting that as a variable. Lambda function, and then it's got a variable. A class can go in a variable. So it's breaking out all these additional concepts that we're going to be learning on later down the line, and it's taking them and showing how you could do that. And that's because we asked for the complexity. And I'm going to ask it, can you give 5 basic examples as well with comments? Because it's not really providing comments, and that's fine, but I'm going to ask it to provide comments. All right, cool. So we have some comments here. It's going through this. So we're getting down to, hey, a variable is basically followed by an equal sign. You're saying, hey, this is this. A variable is a variable. You're basically sliding the value of one variable into another. You've got an equation that equals a variable. Very cool. So it's a pretty simple concept, but it is worth hitting this with any of the questions that you do have about variables. Just throw them in the chat there. I know I hit it with the prompt for the complex examples, but feel free to just ask it for anything that would help you learn at this point. Now we already have some examples of variable names, but there's a whole section in W3 Schools on this. And so it has some illegal variable names and some legal variable names. It's really good to know whenever you're going to actually spell out variables and figure out what to name them. It has examples of the different types of casing that you can use, which is just how you use capital and lowercase letters or underscores to build your naming conventions. Now, this is really cool. It shows how you can use many variables, you can assign multiple values to multiple variables, and you can do this with comma separated values. So what I could do is I could go ahead and put this in here, and I could say, can you give me 5 more problems with explanations, comments that highlight what this code does. And so it's going to take this type of coding problem, or just this snippet of code, because it's not even really necessarily a problem, and then it's going to give 5 problems that are in line with this breakdown. And it is using exactly the orange, banana, cherry breakdown. So sometimes this is a highlight of where ChatGPT kind of goes a little bit off. But in a case like this, whenever it's doing something a little bit messy like this that doesn't line up, I'm going to say don't use that exact code example. Make different examples that are similar in nature. And all I'm saying is, like, don't use that verbatim. Make some problems that kind of look like that. So see, now it's building out a numerical, cat, dog, bird. It's got some decimals. And then I could ask it for increased or decreased complexity, or more coding examples, more comments, or whatever would help me learn. And I can just keep doing this. And I could say, at this point, can you explain what problem number 4 that you gave me does? What is true and false doing there? And so when I give it a prompt like that, it's going to go and explain what this is doing, and then give more of a just a text breakdown description that just says, expands upon what is actually happening in this code, right? And then we could run through the same process of saying, hey, tell me like I'm 10, tell me like I'm 5, whatever. Please explain this in greater depth until we get it, really. And so what this is allowing us to do with Python, at least, is expand upon our weak points to get to what we need to learn. And this shows an example of a list, which is something we haven't quite really gotten into just yet, but it does show how there could be a list, and then inside that list you could unpack it by describing that the first, second, and third in that list were they're separate variables now. So we could actually ask chat, paste this in, can you explain what this code does? And then we pass that in, and it's saying, okay, this is using multiple assignment to assign a list of strings to variables. Okay, and so it's giving a whole bullet by bullet breakdown of what is happening in this code. And then it's going to say, here's what the output is. So we have a visual here, and we could say, could you give me 2 more similar code examples, similar but different? And then it's going to give 2 similar examples of multiple assignment to assign the elements of a list to variables. So you see it does 1 through 5, and then it does A, B, C, D, and E, and then it's saying that in numbers, it was just reaching in and getting A, B, C, D, and E, and then pulling those out essentially. Now this is cool because this is getting into tuples and variables. So this would be at this stage a higher level complexity than where we've even been. So this would be a good point to ask some questions. But you see it's printing out everything very sequentially. It's saying, hey, here's the example, here's what it's doing, and it's giving you something to work with. Now the next section talks about outputting variables, and we've kind of already hit on that pretty good. It's just talking about printing variables, and so where we have work through this a little bit, you can take any of these pieces here and go ahead and put them in to ChatGPT and ask for a greater explanation. But okay, here with global variables, this is an interesting one. So we're saying, can we create a variable outside of a function and use it inside the function? So for global variables, I'll just say, give me 5 examples of Python global variable usage. And then it should generate those. And while we're waiting for that to generate, we can just sit here and kind of look at this. We could go and try out this inside the sandbox, or we could start to bring things over here. And we really haven't done that yet, so we're still kind of hanging out on the old Google Colab. But cool, here's some examples right here. And what we could do is we could start practicing bringing over some code. We could take this, we could bring it over, put it in Google Colab, and then what we could do, even before that, is we could add in a line of code. We could paste that in, but what we could do is we could say that this is a comment. We could even click on text, and then we could put this in here, and then make this bold. Or actually, we don't even need to do that, but if we wanted to make that bold, I think we would do this. And so that's definitely not code. We could put our explanations in text below it, just so we have some notes to ourselves of the best pieces of the tutoring. And you see, so we have a code block here, and this text would just be here as a note. And we can just always go in here and just hit save or Control S, and then we can just go right back to learning. All right, so we got to the variable exercises section. Just like the last ones, we can go ahead and ask for variable exercises. So give me 10 complex variable exercises to increase my understanding. And we'll see if that works. If this happens, feel free to just refresh your ChatGPT, and then it should work just fine. All right, so it's pushing those out. All we had to do is refresh to get over that error. And so it's giving you some written ones. It's telling you, hey, can you do this and do that? And when all those print out, you're going to have some pretty complex practice that you could take over to the notebook. And other than that, we've gone through all the variable stuff, and I think we're ready to move on to data types. All right, so for the next section on Python data types, it's just going to talk about the various data types that Python has and how you can use these. Are all really important to understand. Now, when we're talking about examples, you can go over to ChatGPT and just prompt some examples like we have been doing. But let's dive down here and see where we can hit something. Okay, so when it comes to these data types, a set and frozen set, right? So we could say, like, that's kind of like a higher level complexity. Let's say, can you explain the difference between a set and a frozen set in Python? Okay, and we'll see what it comes back. Okay, so a frozen set is an immutable version of a set, and then we could ask it to explain, like, where 10 basically gets some more straightforward explanation than just immutable. What does that mean in the literal? So I could say, where would I use a frozen? Can you give me 3 real world examples? And we'll see what it does to generate that out. And so it's going to give those examples. And cool, right? So we have all those here to reference. We could do a similar type of approach to break down and learn all the different data types here. Now we'll slide on down. Okay, setting data types. So this is where you would actually specify what the data type is, and you would say variable equals, and then you would define the data type and then pass that in. Now the next step is numbers, and we'll just go ahead and we'll blast through that here. So for numbers, I'm going to pass these. Can you tell me the difference between these three numerical types in Python? And just paste those in. Okay, so it's saying basically the difference is whole numbers, and then the next one will float. That's going to be our decimal. And then with complex, let's say that that's actually, like the name suggests, a little bit more of a complex topic. So let's say, can you give me 5 code use case examples of where complex could come in handy? We'll send that. So we'll get some examples off of just this explanation here. And once again, at any point in time, if you're having any confusion with any piece of this, just inject and ask. So like right here, this is giving me just the text. It's not giving me code. So I'm actually going to say, give me code for those use case examples. Because we want to actually have some code. Okay, so this is getting into some pretty complex stuff here. Kind of physics type stuff. Yeah, you got calculations in quantum mechanics. So yeah, definitely leaning into a lot higher level. Let's see what W3 Schools has over here. That's the letter is the imaginary part in there. Okay, great. And then what we could do, it goes into talk about random numbers, and so we could say, give me some good examples of how to generate random numbers. And this is really cool if you need to make up dummy data sets for projects that you're building lists and dictionaries for. You could make up fake age ranges or numbers for financial bank balances, whatever you want to do that you need to use for random. So definitely a big fan of that. And then that would just be something that you would want to ask. So for example, you say, could you show me how to use random to make a list of 10 bank balances between 5K and 500K. And then we'll see if it picks up on that. So it should be helping us generate these fake bank balances. So it's going to say, hey, between these two values for range and that, print balances. So this would be the code that would help us get to those fake balances for that like banking data project that we wanted to build out. So pretty much anything that you can think of, just ask, be proactive, and ask along the way, so that way GPT can help you understand things. All right, so we're going to move on to Python casting. So this is where you just specify a certain variable type. So for instance, let's look down here. So if you say x equals integer 1, you're casting 1 as an integer, whereas over here it's casting a string, which we're going to talk about later on down the sections here. And actually the next section, it's casting the string of 3 as an integer, so it's interpreting. So in this case, we could look all the way down these. We have plenty of examples here of how this would work out. Casting's not too complicated of a concept, but we could ask ChatGPT for some examples. Can you give me some problems that involve casting? And let's see what it gives us. If we don't like those, or they're not helpful, we can just ask for a variation. Push back. Okay, and then we can ask, this is kind of a little side trick here, we could say, how can we confirm that data type has variable has been cast correctly? Okay, so stop that, and it's gonna break down. So if we want to actually check, we could use type to check the data type of a variable. So we have a variable, and then we want to find out what data type it is. We can print that type, and then it'll tell us. So it's a little bit of an expansion on this bit of knowledge here that we can do. But on top of this, let's go look at strings. So strings is just any text between quotes is considered a string inside of Python. So you can assign a string to a variable. You can have multi-line strings. Here's kind of how you do that. And pretty simple building block here. Now, it's interesting. So we could say, let's take this, put this code in here, and we'll ask ChatGPT to explain this code. What are the doing? And that right there, that's just the little brackets right next to each other. So like, why is it saying A1 and then it's getting some access to this part of the string? Like, how does that work? So we're gonna see. We're gonna get full explanation here. Okay, so it's telling us it's gonna get access to E, which is the second thing, or the first thing, because this is the H is the 0 thing, and then E is the first thing. Okay, cool. Looping through a string. So this is like a loop of a string. This is cool. We can just sort of see the output here. Great. If we want to see the length of a string, it's just a little function to do that. Want to check if a phrase is in a string. This can be very handy. We could ask ChatGPT to help us make several more examples of code with this use case. And hopefully it doesn't use the exact same text of the best things in life for free. Okay, so in this case we're checking if it starts with or if it ends with. These are super valuable. And then we can count the amount of words in a string. That's great. Now, we can check if a substring appears in the string and return the index of the first occurrence. Cool. And what this reminds me of is passwords, when you have all of those different qualifiers for passwords. So like you have to have special character, uppercase, lowercase, all that different stuff. Could you show me how to build a password creation rule checker using only text, this functionality? Can you make the password checker look for capital, one or more capital letter, one or more number, and length of at least 15 characters. And I wonder if that will take this and then build that out for us. So this could be a real world project sort of use case where maybe some of these things that we just learned could be checking the string to determine whether or not a password meets the creation rules that we've preset. So it would be pretty interesting if this pushes this out. Cool. So it's going down and it's going to show us how to use string methods, and that's even showing some additional functionality for the search, and it's searching for these characters and the length. And so this is a little bit different than what we were working with in the W3 Schools example, but this code would help us figure out if a password is valid or not. Cool, so there's a couple more examples of things you can work on with strings, but ultimately if you don't have any more questions at this point, feel free to move on to the rest of the bits of slice of all these different things for string slicing, modifying, concatenating strings, formatting strings, all this stuff. It's definitely just kind of DIY, work through it, ask the chat when you have an issue.